For 2 full days in May 2025, Ivory Coast plunged into chaos. Gunfire was heard, the internet went dark, and President Alassane Ouattara seemingly disappeared. No one spoke, no one confirmed, yet millions believed a coup had just unfolded. But was there ever a coup? Where was the president? Why did the government say nothing? Let's find out what happened in those 48 hours of silence. Long before the rumors of a coup began swirling through Abidjan, the Ivory Coast was already simmering under the weight of political fatigue, institutional mistrust, and a deeply wounded public. The supposed 48-hour coup may have come and gone without a single bullet confirmed, but its emotional power didn't appear out of nowhere. It came from something that had been building quietly, relentlessly, and dangerously beneath the surface. For years, Ivorians have watched their democracy morph into something more rigid, more opaque, and increasingly disconnected from the will of the people. The country has experienced coups before, most notably in 1999, but what's happening now is less visible and more psychological. What they're living through isn't open war, it's a quiet disintegration. By early 2025, the political air was already dense with suspicion. President Alassane Ouattara, once celebrated for economic growth and post-war recovery, had become a symbol of everything the youth resented: age-old leadership, elite privilege, and enduring loyalty to foreign powers, especially France. His controversial third term in 2020, secured through legal maneuvers that many viewed as constitutional gymnastics, marked a turning point. That's when trust began to corrode. Since then, opposition figures have been sidelined, media outlets have complained of quiet censorship, and the line between government and military power has blurred uncomfortably. Add to this a population that is digitally connected but politically disenfranchised, and you get a perfect storm: people who are watching, waiting, and wondering when it will all collapse. Nowhere is this uncertainty more palpable than among the youth. Nearly 60% of the Ivory Coast population is under the age of 25, many of whom have grown up watching a carousel of leaders promising change but delivering only more deals with foreign banks, more resource exports, and more security partnerships that don't seem to make the streets safer. For this generation, democracy feels like an illusion, and power like a game they're not allowed to play. And then came the elections. The 2025 general elections were supposed to be a test of Ivory Coast's democratic resilience. But when the government barred opposition heavyweight Tidjane Thiam from running, citing dual nationality and questions over his Ivorian citizenship, something snapped. Thiam, a former finance minister and international banker with global credibility, had sparked hope among the political middle. His removal from the race was not just procedural, it was emotional. It told many Ivorians that change was not only denied, but systemically impossible. Public discourse quickly shifted from political strategy to survival instincts. Would the election be fair? Would it happen at all? And if not, what would be the tipping point? This is the Ivory Coast that woke up on May 21st. A country not caught off guard, but already exhausted, already disillusioned, already suspecting that the government they live under is no longer fully in control of its fate. So when someone said, "There's been a coup," the question wasn't "really?" It was "finally?" That readiness to believe, even without evidence, revealed something far deeper than any press release could cover. It showed a nation emotionally detached from its institutions. It showed how fragile order is when people no longer feel protected by it. It showed how easily silence could be mistaken for collapse. In truth, there was no official declaration, no tanks in the streets, no generals holding microphones on state TV. But that doesn't mean people were imagining the threat. In their minds, it had already arrived years ago. What happened in May 2025 wasn't the start of unrest. It was the echo of years of slow unraveling, given shape by 48 hours of fear. And yet, amid that silence, one figure's name began to surface, not from within, but from across the border. A name that has come to symbolize the new language of resistance in West Africa. Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He didn't speak. He didn't post. He wasn't seen anywhere on camera. And yet, by sheer mention alone, his ghost seemed to hover over the Ivorian crisis like a quiet force with the power to disrupt, even from a distance. But why him? Why Traoré? And why did so many Ivorians believe or want to believe that he had something to do with it? To answer that, you have to look beyond borders and into the psychology of West Africa's shifting political soul. In just a few years, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has become something more than a leader. He's become a symbol, not merely of military power, but of defiance, of clean breaks, of ending the old order, fast, sharp, unapologetically. Here's a quick reminder. Please like, share, and subscribe to Black Culture Unlocked for powerful Black news, real stories of our heroes and leaders, and the rich culture and history the world tried to forget. Since taking power in Burkina Faso in 2022 at the age of just 34, Traoré has openly and aggressively challenged the colonial ties that still define much of Francophone Africa's politics. He has expelled French troops, suspended French-funded NGOs, refused IMF austerity conditions, and formed a strategic alliance with Mali and Niger, known as the Alliance of Sahel States AES. To many observers in the West, he's a radical. But to young Africans frustrated by endless cycles of poverty and foreign dependency, he's a liberator. So when the rumors of a coup in Ivory Coast erupted and questions began swirling about where the president was and who could be behind the chaos, it took little more than an unconfirmed telegram post to spark a theory. Traoré had entered Abidjan under the cover of night. Some claimed he met with dissident army factions. Others said his presence alone inspired Ivorian soldiers to act. The stories varied, but they shared one thing in common. None of them had hard evidence. Still, the idea stuck, not because of proof, but because of perception. Because in a region gripped by dissatisfaction, where faith in elections and diplomacy has worn thin, Traoré represents an alternate model of leadership, one that doesn't negotiate with those it considers neo-colonial powers, one that doesn't smile for cameras in Paris or wait politely in Washington, D.C. lobbies. In Ivory Coast, a nation still closely tied to France through military cooperation, economic aid, and the controversial CFA franc, just the possibility of Traoré being involved was enough to make the ground tremble. And let's be clear, the government never confirmed his presence. No flight logs, no official visits, no press conference, but they didn't outright deny it either. And that vacuum only gave oxygen to the fire. Some political insiders claimed that Traoré had sent envoys to Abidjan weeks earlier to feel the mood. Others suggested he had back-channel communication with disillusioned segments of the Ivorian military. These whispers were impossible to verify, but also impossible to ignore, especially when they echoed so closely to what had already played out in Mali and Niger. And there's something else, something more intangible but no less real, the myth of Traoré. Even if he never set foot in Ivory Coast during those days, his reputation did. In an era where politics is driven as much by narrative as by policy, Traoré's story, young soldier topples old regime, rejects Western control, unites Sahel nations, has become a rallying cry. In forums across Africa, his face is printed next to Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, and Amilcar Cabral, as if to say, the anti-colonial spirit isn't dead, dead, it just wears camouflage now. So the real question becomes, did Traoré cause the panic in Ivory Coast? Or has his influence grown so large that it no longer matters whether he did or didn't? In that sense, the rumors themselves were a kind of coup, not of territory, but of imagination, a quiet revolution in how West Africans interpret power, legitimacy, and resistance. What happened next only deepened the mystery. As the rumor mill reached its peak and the population waited for clarity, the government said nothing. No official statement, no presidential address, no military clarification, just a heavy, deliberate silence. And in that silence, confusion turned to fear. In most countries, when a crisis erupts, real or rumored, governments move quickly. A press briefing, a televised appearance, a tweet from a ministry, anything to calm the public and reassert authority. But in Ivory Coast, during the crucial 48 hours when rumors of a coup took over the national psyche, the state simply vanished. No military spokesperson, no cabinet minister, no president, just dead air. This silence, more than any video or WhatsApp message, is what convinced Ivorians that something real was happening. Because even if the rumors were false, why wasn't anyone denying them? This wasn't a matter of slow response. It was an information blackout so absolute that it raised its suspicions. While the public scrambled for answers, many noticed that certain news channels weren't broadcasting. State-run RTI had little to say, while normally vocal government Twitter accounts went quiet. Entire newsrooms froze. Popular Ivorian radio stations, often the first to respond in national emergencies, played music on loop. It was as if everyone with authority had received the same message: say nothing. Then came the technical difficulties. Reports began to emerge of slow or failed internet access in parts of Abidjan, particularly in high-density neighborhoods. Users complained of being unable to upload or view videos. Some noticed WhatsApp voice notes were delayed or failed to send. VPN usage spiked across the country, an unusual indicator of people trying to bypass sudden network restrictions. It wasn't a full blackout, but it was enough to feel like something was being hidden. The timing wasn't lost on anyone. In West African countries, digital silence is a language of its own. The same tactic had been used in other recent coups, in Burkina Faso, in Sudan, even in parts of Ethiopia. When power shifts, internet signals are the first to go. So when connectivity dropped in Ivory Coast, the people didn't wait for confirmation. They filled in the blanks. They'd seen this movie before, and they knew how it ended. The psychological toll of this silence cannot be overstated. In the absence of real information, fear becomes the broadcaster. People whispered that Ouattara had been flown to France in a private jet. Others insisted that the army had split into rival factions and was now negotiating power behind closed doors. Some claimed the French embassy was preparing emergency evacuations for its staff. None of these stories were confirmed, but they were believed. Because silence is not just a lack of noise, it's a loud, strategic vacuum. And in that vacuum, the population felt alone, abandoned, perhaps even betrayed. And this leads to a more uncomfortable question. Was the silence accidental or intentional? Some analysts suggest the government might have used the blackout to test the waters, to see who moved, who spoke, who revealed loyalties. In a political environment where coups have become increasingly common, it's not unheard of for regimes to simulate panic to flush out dissenters, observe military discipline, or gauge international reactions. Was this a controlled burn? A loyalty test? Others believe the silence was purely reactive. The government was simply caught off guard, paralyzed by the speed and virality of the rumor storm, that no one knew what to say because no one knew what was happening. And if that's true, it paints a picture of a state deeply unprepared for even digital crises, a serious vulnerability in an election year. What's even more disturbing is how quickly that silence shifted into dismissal. Once the president reappeared and the rumors were deemed false, the government acted as if nothing had happened. No No press conference explaining the communications gap, no investigation into the alleged internet slowdown, no attempt to address the real fears that had surfaced. Instead, authorities pointed fingers at foreign actors and disinformation campaigns, as though the panic had nothing to do with domestic discontent or governance failures. This rhetorical pivot from silence to blame offered no closure to a public that had just spent 2 days imagining the fall of their government. And that's the real story. When institutions disappear in moments of crisis, the people learn to stop depending on them. That loss of faith, that quiet resignation, is not easily repaired. It plants seeds of long-term distrust, and worse, it creates a public that no longer fears or respects state authority, because they've already imagined life without it. And in that void, another threat begins to grow. Not foreign, not online, but internal. Next, we turn to the president himself. As panic spread and fear filled the streets, where was Alassane Ouattara, and why didn't he say a single word when his country needed him most? As Ivory Coast descended into confusion and fear during those 2 days in May 2025, one figure's absence became more disturbing than any rumor, more deafening than any silence. President Alassane Ouattara. For a man who had ruled for over a decade, someone who once commanded airwaves with promises of stability and prosperity, his disappearance from the national stage at the exact moment the nation needed reassurance became more than a mystery. It became a symbol of everything the people feared: abandonment, secrecy, and a leader who no longer felt the need to speak to his citizens. The coup may have been a lie, but the president's vanishing act was not. For 48 hours, no photos, no videos, no live streams, no messages, no denials, not even a pre-recorded voice note. In the digital age, when a head of state can address the public within seconds via a smartphone, this kind of absence wasn't just suspicious, it was political negligence. And the question on everyone's lips was simple: where is Ouattara? Some believed he had fled the country. Others speculated that he had gone into hiding until military forces could restore control. A few fringe voices even claimed he had been detained by his security detail and was being forced to negotiate his resignation. These theories may have sounded wild, but what gave them power was not evidence. It was the president's refusal to appear. Even after his re-emergence, when he was finally seen leading a cabinet meeting and attending a diplomatic ceremony with Togo's president, he did not speak about what had happened. He smiled, shook hands, and posed for cameras, but not a single sentence addressed the hysteria that had gripped his nation. No explanation of where he was, no acknowledgement of what his people had just experienced, not even a sentence to say, "I am here." This is not merely a communication failure, it is a collapse in leadership. In crises, leaders are not judged by the strength of their institutions, but by their presence. Think of other presidents facing upheaval. They go on air, they stand in front of flags, they say something, anything, to remind people that someone is still in charge. But Ouattara offered nothing. It left the impression, not just domestically but internationally, that either he didn't know what to say, or worse, that he believed he didn't have to. This wasn't the first time the president had relied on distance during a national moment. In recent years, he has taken on an increasingly aloof posture. Criticisms of elite detachment have grown, particularly as economic inequality widens and youth unemployment remains stubbornly high. To many Ivorians, especially the young, Ouattara no longer represents a present or accessible figure. He has become a photograph in a palace, not a voice in their struggle. And that's what made his silence during the phantom coup so unsettling. It wasn't just about one event. It confirmed a pattern. It validated the suspicion that in moments of real fear, real doubt, and real instability, the president was not someone to look toward. He was someone to look for. In many ways, this absence only deepened the coup narrative. The idea that a head of state would go missing during such a volatile moment made it easier to believe that a coup had truly occurred. Because if it hadn't, then why wasn't he there to say so? The government could blame disinformation all they wanted, but the fuel for that fire came from the very top. Some argue that Ouattara was advised to wait, that any premature appearance might have fed into the hysteria, but that theory falls apart under basic logic. Does a panicked nation calm down when its leader is invisible? Others suggest that his silence was strategic. By not dignifying the rumors, he allowed them to die on their own. But they didn't die. They morphed into resentment, into doubt, into questions that haven't been answered since. And if the president believes the moment is past, he may be gravely mistaken. Because what the people saw, what they will remember, is that in their moment of fear, their leader did not speak. He vanished, which raises a new kind of alarm. If silence is the president's response to chaos, what happens if the next crisis isn't a rumor but the real thing? When the dust began to settle on the so-called phantom coup, the Ivorian government finally broke its silence, not with clarity, not with accountability, but with accusation. With the president having reappeared and top officials returning to their routines as though nothing had happened, it fell to the country's National Agency for Information System Security, ANSSI, to offer the only official explanation for the chaos that had just gripped a nation. Their message? The entire thing had been orchestrated by outside forces using digital disinformation. It was a swift and blunt diagnosis. Foreign actors, online lies, coordinated manipulation. According to ANSSI, what the public had experienced wasn't a coup attempt, a mutiny, or a government collapse. It was an illusion. A digital mirage projected by unnamed powers hoping to destabilize the country. A national psychosis sparked not by gunshots or tanks, but by cleverly distributed viral content. But let's take a step back. While disinformation is a real and growing threat, especially in fragile democracies, the way it was deployed as an all-encompassing excuse in this instance raises more questions than it answers. First, the government named no culprits, no countries, no political groups, no influencers, not even a rogue TikToker. If the panic had been so carefully coordinated as officials claimed, then why not trace it? Digital forensic tools exist. IP addresses can be tracked. Telegram admins can be identified. If this were a cyber attack, then where's the evidence? Second, the timing of the statement was suspiciously convenient. The disinformation narrative only appeared after the crisis had naturally begun to die down, after people had already returned to work, after markets had begun to stabilize. There was no effort to combat the panic while it was happening. The disinformation excuse only emerged when it was safe to use it, when no one would ask too many hard questions. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the disinformation claim completely ignores the real fuel behind the fire, the political environment. It assumes that Ivorians were tricked into believing a coup was happening, but the truth is, they believed it because they already felt it was possible. A tweet didn't invent mistrust. A doctored video didn't create public fear. These were already present, waiting, festering, unresolved. The danger in blaming foreign disinformation is that it treats the public like victims of hypnosis, as if they can't tell reality from fiction. But that's not what happened. People weren't duped, they were primed. And instead of addressing that emotional readiness, the dissatisfaction, the political fatigue, the economic tension, the government deflected. It created a ghost enemy and hoped the public would look away from the real one. Of course, disinformation campaigns do happen. West Africa is no stranger to them. In the past, foreign political consultancies, diaspora influence networks, and even state-backed operatives from both Western and non-Western countries have attempted to stir unrest for geopolitical gain. There's precedent, but there's a difference between acknowledging that possibility and using it as a blanket narrative to avoid answering real, urgent questions. Why wasn't the president visible when the rumors began? Why didn't any government official go live on national television to reassure the public? Why were local radio stations silent? Why were internet services interrupted? Why were newsrooms frozen? None of these questions can be answered by blaming fake news. Disinformation may have lit the match, but the country was already soaked in fuel, and it was the government that let the fire spread without lifting a finger. The disinformation narrative also sets a dangerous precedent. By portraying panic as an externally engineered event, the government now has a justification for future internet shutdowns, increased censorship, and digital surveillance. In the name of cybersecurity, civil liberties can be tightened. Political opposition can be accused of spreading destabilizing lies. Independent journalists can be labeled as agents of unrest, all under the umbrella of national protection. And once again, the people lose, not just access to truth, but access to the ability to ask questions at all. So while the state may feel it has regained control, the damage lingers. In the public's mind, disinformation wasn't just online. It came from every direction, including from the silence of their government. And in that information fog, nothing is trusted. Not the internet, not the news, not even the truth. What began as a digital rumor ended as a moral indictment, not of the people, but of the leadership that failed them. By the time the Ivorian government declared the coup rumors baseless and blamed them on foreign disinformation, the damage was already done. Not to buildings, not to the military, but to something far more critical, the public's grip on reality. For 48 hours, Ivorians lived through a crisis that technically didn't happen. There were no verified gunfights in Abidjan, no official resignations, no takeovers of ministries, no footage of soldiers reading declarations on national TV. And yet, for nearly 2 full days, the collective consciousness of a country accepted an alternative truth, that the president was gone, that the state had collapsed, and that power had changed hands, perhaps silently, perhaps violently, but certainly. This phenomenon isn't just a case study in mass hysteria. It's a sign of what happens when belief becomes more powerful than evidence, when the institutions of truth, governments, media, military command structures fail to speak clearly. Perception doesn't wait. It builds its truth in real time. Ivory Coast didn't just experience a phantom coup, it experienced something more disorienting, a cognitive rupture, a moment where the public's trust in the fabric of national reality broke so completely that rumor became law and silence became confirmation. At the heart of this rupture lies a dangerous psychological drift that's been growing in many parts of Africa, and indeed around the world. In an age of misinformation, media manipulation, and political gaslighting, people no longer wait for proof. They go with what feels true. And in Ivory Coast, the feeling of a coup was more credible than the government's later denial. Why? Because the people's faith in formal processes had already eroded. This moment showed that even if the state is functioning on paper, it may have already collapsed in the minds of the people. It revealed a dangerous split between the official country and the imagined country, one made of laws, the other made of memories, fears, and long-held grievances. And when those two nations diverge, the imagined one starts to win. For example, when people believed Ouattara had disappeared, it wasn't because they had satellite data or confirmed statements. It was because they expected him to vanish. Because in their emotional reality, they had long felt abandoned. Because in past crises, he had often remained distant. So when the silence came, it didn't contradict their expectations. It fulfilled them. Similarly, the idea that a revolution was underway, possibly supported by neighboring military regimes, didn't seem outlandish to many. After all, the region had already seen it happen in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. The new political language of the Sahel had shifted from elections to overthrows. To many West Africans, military power wasn't something to fear anymore. It was something to admire, something that got things done. This readiness to believe without proof has a cost. When reality becomes negotiable, so does accountability. If the public is unsure what's real, then the government doesn't need to answer for what it didn't officially do. And if officials aren't challenged with facts, they can dismiss everything as fake, regardless of what people experienced. In this vacuum, conspiracy becomes comfort. People turn to alternative narratives not just because they're exciting, but because they offer structure. They offer villains, explanations, and timelines. And when institutions refuse to provide those things, rumor becomes the new governance. There's a word for this condition: dissociation. Ivory Coast is not alone in it. Other post-colonial states with histories of coups, elite betrayal, and outside interference suffer the same symptoms, but rarely has it been so clearly exposed in real time. An entire population living through an imagined revolution in the absence of tanks or takeover. And the scariest part, the state has not attempted to address this psychological collapse. No national dialogue, no community outreach, no public healing. It's as if they've moved on, thinking the people will too. But you don't forget what you believed. You don't forget the adrenaline, the fear, the possibility that everything was about to change. Once you believe something that deeply, even for 2 days, a part of you stays there. And next time, it won't take much to return. So now the question becomes, how do you lead a country where the citizens no longer believe what you say, or even what they see, because they've already learned to believe something else entirely? By the end of May 2025, the rumors of a coup in Ivory Coast had been officially dismissed. The president had reappeared, and government officials were back to business as usual. But beneath this carefully restored surface, something much deeper had cracked. Something invisible, immeasurable, but fundamental: the people's trust in their state. You can rebuild roads, fix broadcast towers, relaunch media streams, but once trust breaks, the collapse is internal. It doesn't happen with smoke or sirens. It happens in conversations, in glances, in silence. In the moment when someone asks, "Do you believe them?" the room falls quiet. That's the real coup. In the aftermath of the 48-hour panic, there was no widespread protest, no demands for resignations, no journalists pressing the president for answers. But this wasn't peace, it was numbness. A kind of civic dissociation had taken hold. People had experienced a rupture in their sense of reality, and instead of fighting, they retreated. And that retreat into skepticism, into conspiracy, into disengagement is far more dangerous than any riot, because now every official act will be met with doubt. Every televised speech will be filtered through suspicion. Every election will be weighed against the memory of those 2 days when everything seemed possible and no one in power spoke. The government may believe it has regained control. It has not. It has simply returned to a version of governance that no longer includes the emotional consent of its people. The citizens are no longer participants. They are detached observers, waiting for the next signal, because now they know that even silence can mean revolution. This erosion of trust affects everything. Take the upcoming October 2025 elections. The government may declare them free and fair, but will people believe it? Will they vote with hope or with resignation? Will they see the electoral process as a mechanism for change or just another performance in a system already decided? And beyond elections, consider the military. During the panic, the armed forces didn't mutiny, but neither did they publicly assert control or reassure the population. The absence of visible action left space for new assumptions to take root. Is the military loyal to the presidency? Is it fractured? Was it complicit in staying silent? No official statement has addressed this gap, and in the void, imagination has done what silence always allows. It has rewritten reality. The media, too, has not escaped the fallout. The national broadcaster, RTI, went quiet during the critical window. Many of the country's top journalists and editors have remained unusually cautious. Some privately admit they weren't sure what they were allowed to report or feared retribution if they misstepped during an ambiguous crisis. In other words, even the press froze. And when both the government and the media fall silent, the public doesn't just lose facts, they lose faith in the very idea that truth can be found. Perhaps the most subtle but telling indicator of the trust collapse is in daily conversation. Ask an Ivorian today what happened during those 48 hours, and you won't get facts. You'll get personal interpretations, emotional truths, half whispers. People will say, they won't tell us what happened, or, you know something happened, they're just covering it up. This kind of language is not accidental. It's the vocabulary of a society that no longer feels seen or spoken to. A society that has moved from being governed to being managed and knows it. And the state, for all its press releases and posturing, seems unaware of this fracture. Officials speak of normalcy. They reference foreign meddling. They talk of moving forward, but they are speaking over a silence, not into it. They do not realize that while they returned to their offices, the people quietly exited the room. This is the cost of ignoring fear. This is what happens when leadership mistakes image for impact. For 48 hours, the population lived through a fantasy that revealed more truth than any government memo. And now, the aftermath isn't rebellion, it's withdrawal. Ivory Coast is not on the edge of another war, it's on the edge of something harder to fight. Apathy. Because when people stop believing in the system, they don't always rise. Sometimes they simply let it fall. Do you think there is a way to recuse the broken trust? Is silence the answer? Why is the president still not trying? Let us know in the comment section. What do you think? Was all this a coup or misinformation? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it, because here, we tell the stories no one else will. From ancient African civilizations to modern Black excellence, we reveal the truth, the power, and the legacy they tried to erase. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.